I want to thank you for being here. This session in particular is really exciting and near and dear to my heart. My name is Dev Patik. I'm the CEO and founder of the Sports Facilities Advisory and the Sports Facilities Management. Since 2003, we have planned, funded, and we now manage community recreation centers. We've done that in 800 communities around the world, $6 billion in those kinds of projects, most of them publicly funded or publicly backed, and it's all about creating access to sport. So this particular panel is thrilling to me because this is about the practical. This is about the what can you do in the next few weeks to take the mission of Project Play and to bring it to life in your own community. Who do you need to gather? What are the things you can do, as opposed to necessarily all of the very large policy issues which you can contribute to, but require oftentimes years. This can be a matter of months. So we're thrilled. We have an amazing panel up here of people who are getting things done in real time, affecting kids' lives. And we're going to be facilitated by Kevin Martinez from ESPN, their outreach program, so an amazing moderator as well. So I hope it's practical and useful. Thank you.
All right. Do I need the mic? Okay, there you go. Thank you. Well, again, thank you all for being here. It's exciting to be here. Kudos to Tom and Raisa for an amazing, what they've been able to put together. Their thought leadership, obviously the coordination of this, and it's a powerful team of, 2 or 3 that are doing this amazing work for everybody, so we're glad to be part of it. So I'm Kevin Martinez. I am the Vice President of Corporate Citizenship at ESPN. I've been there for all of 5.5 years, so I'm fairly new. I'm in ESPN terms. I wanted to take just a quick moment to make sure that I have an announcement for you today. So I'm very excited about this. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I do my due diligence here to make sure that we get to the Pulse question. So would you all please go to Pulse and remember to renew your browser. And it's what grade do you give the stakeholders in providing sufficient places to play? So I'd like to make sure we get that into the conversation here. So, so the cool news today, I'm just excited as an employee of ESPN, of our parent company, the Walt Disney Company. Today we have something called the Upfronts. You guys know what those are? Which is we tell everybody what we're going to be doing in our advertising and our shows for the next year. It's where all the sales go down. But one of the key elements that we're announcing today is that we are going to be entering into agreement with Special Olympics for the next 3 years as their worldwide broadcasting partner. And we're also going to be re-upping our unified grant, which is the most amazing thing. If you don't know unified sports, it's people with and without intellectual disabilities working together, playing and learning and developing. And it has just been an incredible cultural wave for our company. And today, I also want to say that Mary Davis, who has just been appointed the new CEO of Special Olympics, is here. So from Ireland.
We're equally excited.
Yes, so very excited about that. So back to our work here. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know that ESPN is very engaged in this, not only from the editorial side, but also from the way that we invest and the way that our partners that we have throughout the U.S. and we're globally based, but we're investing in bits and pieces of the 8 areas that Tom has referred to in the Project Play area. So it's an interesting thing for us to look at coaching, to look at safety, to look at development and skills-based and all those things. But we're a broadcast company, so we always try to partner. That's one of the big pieces we're going to talk about today is partnership. It's like, how do you make this happen, right? Our esteemed colleagues here are going to be able to tell us. The other thing, too, is in the spirit of inclusion, which is equity. Make sure that everybody has an access point. How do you make sure that that happens, and how do you plan for that in your processing? I'm going to introduce our panelists now. Corliss Allen Solomon is from North Carolina. I'm going to read your bio because you're a doctoral student of North Carolina in Charlotte, and awarded you research faith-based organizations that support healthy living, and awarded the 2009 CDC Public Health Prevention Service Fellowship. thank you for being here. Chip Patterson is the Executive Director of First Tee of Greater New Orleans, member of the New Orleans Citywide Coalition to Improve Access to Sport. And I'm actually really interested in hearing what Chip says, because I know very little about golf, and we have a number of golf programs on, maybe you watched ESPN, and we've looked at First Tee, and so I'm going to learn a little bit about that today. Also, we have James Siegal. James is now the new CEO of KaBOOM, which I'm sure many of you know. I have dealt with him intimately when I was at Home Depot. We did 1,000 playgrounds in 1,000 days. So that was a lot. Just, congratulations for your 16,000 playgrounds, and obviously a thought leader, graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School. So you see it's getting smarter going this way, right? Erin Smith is Director of Education and Training for U.S. Lacrosse and a member of the Project Play Working Group. Excited about this because this is a new sport. This is really gaining some momentum, and to hear about how this works in our application of small spaces. So before we get going here, I just want to see what the results of our polling data is. And I'm not sure where that is, but I'm sure it'll show up somewhere. See? 67. Okay, so that's a good place for us to start. So average among men and women, and to make sure that there seems to be a sense of opportunity here. Also that we are possibly addressing other issues and opportunities for us to do that. So I'm going to start first. I'm going to jump to Corliss because I have a question. When you're talking faith-based, and you're looking at all the different assets, whether, if we think about all the schools and churches and everything else, how is it that you can be successful at bringing the opportunity of play to small spaces, utilizing all these other assets, not having to build them, but they already exist?
Well, when you think about sustainability, you want to think about structures that are already there. And when you think about North Carolina, and particularly Charlotte, there's a lot of churches. I mean, there's a lot of health issues and obesity, but there are a lot of churches. I mean, big churches, small churches, medium churches, doesn't matter. There's a lot of churches. And what we decided to do was, these churches had a lot of space, right? So they were located in these low-income areas where a lot of minorities don't have access to physical activity, but yet there's these church structures with a lot of green space. So I thought, what can we do with these churches to get the physical activity going? Because they're already there. All we have to do is kind of increase it. That way, once our monies leave, our study leave, they can keep it going. So we found a lot of Spanish-speaking churches. We found a lot of African-American churches in these low-income areas. And what we did was provide sports equipment, simple things as soccer equipment. With one of the churches, we did a walking log so that kids would be able to know, okay, if I run a mile, this is what a mile looks like in my community. Wow. And these are small things that we can all do, right? That's not great, although I would like to think it's great. It's not that great, and anybody can do it. It's just a matter of saying, this is what you need to do, given your space, now let's get it going.
So what's the liability to that for going into other structures that, obviously have other conditions? So shared use agreements, did you run into that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big issue. I mean, it's nice, as my faith-based organizations are. They are very interesting to work with. Very, very interesting. And they brought up things about insurance, but what we did is set open use policy. So when you're thinking about an open use policy, it isn't as stringent as a joint use agreement, which you mostly see in like a schools or government entities. So with open use policies, they're a little nicer to get around with, and all it's saying is we're going to allow our church park to be open from 8 to 8 p.m. to anyone who's in our neighborhood. So if you're within walking distance and you want to use our basketball courts or you want to use our soccer fields, come and use it. It'll be open from 8 to 8. And we've been working with Change Lab in Oakland, California to really help with some of the legal questions that some of our churches may have.
That's fantastic. So to the rest of the group, anything about shared use that you want to add? Anything that you've run into that you could bring to the table that would help you run into any liability issues? Okay. So I also want to talk about First Tee, and I want to talk about what I think is an issue, and I'm not sure if it is an issue, but your model is that you bring golf and learning and development to people, but do you bring them to golf courses? Is there a transportation issue? Is there getting them to these greens?
So we have basically two goals with our programs. Obviously, I mean, a lot of the people in the room are probably working with kids who wouldn't necessarily have access to a golf course. I mean, whether you live in an inner city where there's not a golf course available, or you live in a rural area where there may not be a golf facility for miles, kind of our goal is to, one, bring the game of golf to the students where they are. So we bring the game to the neighborhoods. So we're working with Boys and Girls Clubs, recreation centers, local recreation departments, and local schools to introduce the concepts of the game of golf through some modified equipment that we use. But the ultimate goal with introducing the students to those programs is to get them to a green grass facility. So we can do that through field trips with the organizations that we're partnering with, because once the kids set foot on a golf course, that's really when it kind of clicks in their brain. You know, they may be doing this outreach program in their gymnasium or their classroom or their cafeteria, but then when they get to a golf course, you know, they put 2 and 2 together and say, wow, this is an amazing facility to be able to get to go and utilize and just kind of see the beautiful outdoors setting that golf courses are typically set in. So we do those introductory programs that can be done anywhere and expose them to the rules and kind of the basic concepts of the game. But then ultimately is the goal is to get them to a green grass facility and show them what that looks like. And once that link happens, that's when we've really got the kids hooked.
So from an equity position, so you're obviously New Orleans, so you're in a dense community. So how do you get to these kids? How do you know who they are? How do you find them?
So New Orleans is unique. I mean, we've got, we run the spectrum in terms of the kids that we're serving. So we've got inner city Orleans, for example, where kids, high poverty area. We've got the North Shore of New Orleans, where it's typically the suburbs and more middle and upper income families that we're working with. And then we've got a couple of the river parishes down on the bayou where you've got more of a rural setting. So we've got kids that run the spectrum in terms of who the kids that we're getting access to the sport. So our programs are basically available to any kid. That's what I like most about the First Tee program is that we're bringing all of these different populations of kids together kind of to the same golf course facilities. So we work with their schools, we work with the community centers, we work with the recreation departments to expose them to the program initially. And then, like I said, we get those transportation opportunities to provide them access to a green grass facility. And once that link is made, they're really into the program. Excellent.
So in the Project Play outline, there were some areas that we wanted you to look at in the Think Small space, and some of them were very definitive to show you exactly what some of our stakeholders have gone through and how they've worked and partnered together. They've included what they call the mini pitches for soccer. And Ed, I wanted to know if you could just for a minute, he's off our panel over here, but speak to the mini pitches and how U.S. Soccer Foundation helped create that.
Thank you so much for including us in the conversation. Mini pitches are about the size of a tennis court, in which we can put those right in neighborhoods where children are. We were focused on underserved urban communities, and one of our earliest learnings was even when we had programming that there really weren't enough safe places for children to play. So we can convert school playground areas, any kind of fenced-in area that we can turn into a mini pitch, put it within easy walking distance of children for cost of for $50,000, we can put these mini pitches into a neighborhood. Our friends, we partnered with KaBOOM on doing 7 pitches together. And you know, part of our learning from KaBOOM is that anything that's beyond a half a mile away from a child is probably too far, particularly a child in an underserved community. So placing these pitches right in the neighborhood where children are, this year we're going to complete 43 pitches this year. This year for us ends June 30th. We'll complete 43. We've got a 10-year goal of building 1,000 mini pitches nationwide to facilitate access to play in communities. The keys to it, though, are this. First, you have to collaborate with others to get the funding. Almost every project we partner with Major League Soccer, we partnered with health foundations and others to support the investment in these projects. But it's important, you can't talk about the mini pitch or any field project or any play space unless you can show the value to the community, right? And so the importance of having programming on this space, the idea of build it and they just will come is not true. For all the reasons that were outlined by the First Lady and the panel this morning, safety issues, et cetera, if you have programming there, number one, then parents will allow their children to be there. If you have evidence-based programming that shows it's addressing important health or social issues, youth development outcomes, health outcomes, then you get funding support from government, from foundations, from philanthropists, because they might not care that much about your particular sport, but they do care about improving health and social outcomes.
Yeah. The collaboration thing, you know, it's this constant overused word, misused word, right? So let's go collaborate. And we see this from some of the work that we do at ESPN. We work with all the leagues, we work with most of the NGBs, we work with all these different organizations throughout. But there is this sense of opportunity, is the best way I can describe it, that there probably should be more collaborations amongst different nonprofits and different organizations because they have pretty much the same outcome goals in their impact statements and what they're trying to measure for success. So I would argue as a continued effort in the collaboration space, from a corporate standpoint, when you have a collaborative nature amongst you, there's a multiple set of nonprofits working together, that makes me very, very happy. And it makes other of my sponsors happy as well because they see that you're going deeper into the community and you're hearing disparate voices, sometimes not the ones that you want to hear, but you're getting a broader perspective of it. On the collaboration side, I'm going to jump to lacrosse. So you've got the World's Game, and now you got this great, amazing game, we know because we love it. America's Game, exactly. So here you are with a brand new sport, Erin, and you know, the question is, can you play lacrosse on a pitch that's for soccer or for tennis or an open space on a playground? Tell me how you work with that and that type of collaborative nature with other sports and also other partners.
Well, the answer is yes, you can. And then I'll back it up in that lacrosse isn't a new sport. It's actually America's oldest sport, which was my little allusion there to America's sport, played by the Native Americans. It's the only sport native to this continent. So our vision as U.S. Lacrosse, the national governing body, is that every child and everyone in the United States has the opportunity to enjoy and play the sport of lacrosse as well. And it fits really nicely into everything that Project Play stands for because particularly the sports sampling and multi-sport participation and collaboration, because soccer players make great lacrosse players in the spring and vice versa. And we've shown from all the data that the best lacrosse players play lots of sports, and the sport augments other sports skills. Basketball players, you name it, you can find a cross-pollination there. So working with other sports and sharing those spaces is really important because lacrosse is viewed as a newer sport in terms of the common vernacular of sport in the United States. A lot of times we're looked at as interlopers. Like, we can't add lacrosse. Our fields are already booked for soccer and football and everything else. We can't possibly add another field sport with how many players? You know, you need 22 players to play a lacrosse competition? That's crazy. So it started out as a happy little accident going on in the other room, the design for development conversation that's happening. We started designing small-sided competitions for lacrosse. What does 3v3 lacrosse look like versus the men's game is 10 versus 10, the women's game is 11 versus 11. That's a lot of kids and players and moving parts. But how can we peel our game down to be 3v3 or 5v5? And we started looking at it mostly from a developmental standpoint. Like, a little 6-year-old isn't going to be able to make the decisions to play a 10-on-10 game, but they can certainly know, I have the ball and I have 2 teammates and I have to choose who to pass the ball to. But what happened out of that was everybody started clamoring at our door saying, wow, you wrote these great little guidelines for how to play 3-on-3 with 6-year-olds. Well, why don't we play 3-on-3 with 12-year-olds or 15-year-olds or just any 6 kids with 6 sticks can play on a tennis court size space or with little pop-up goals. And not only are their skills getting better, but they're just having fun because they're never more than 1 pass away from the ball. That means you work your butt off for 6 minutes and you need a break, so sub on the next 3 kids. And then what happened with that was people started being like, well, can we start putting these small fields in now? And we had requests from some partners of ours in New York City. We have a field we need to rehab, but how can we put 3 smaller fields across the space of 1 so that we can get 3 competitions going and station-based practices? And then we're saying, well, soccer's already putting these fields in. They're going to do it. We'll just hop on and go for the ride, or give them a call and find out how we can have clinics together, or introduce kids to lots of other sports using the same space. Yep. So those little guidelines sort of spawned a whole movement of people saying, yes, we've been waiting for this. We just didn't know how to do it because all we knew was what ESPN broadcasts, which is the NCAA version of the game, which is completely overwhelming, versus the version that we're coming up with now that's much more accessible to every kid, whether they're in the city or a rural community or somewhere in the middle.
So it's interesting because if you when Tom asked me to speak, I said, are you sure? Because I am a, as you can imagine, I am a purveyor, I am a advocate of sport. And I love free play, I love unstructured play, but I want to get to sport. I want to get to winners and losers, because we want to talk about development. We want to talk about, you know, the story of sport, which is what ESPN does, which is gets to that point about talking about the people, the athlete, and specifically the sports fan. But it's interesting because I spent my first, 6, 7 years building playgrounds with KaBOOM at Home Depot, talking about this free kind of unstructured play and what that did for socialization skills and, the development of leadership and just an equity, right? Like kids don't know the difference. They're just trying to get on that slide. Can you speak to some of those elements how you can transition unstructured play and social play to sport and to other types of opportunities?
Sure. I think put simply, every athlete gets their start on a playground. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's all about making sure kids get a balance of all different types of active play in the same way that you need a healthy balance of nutrition. So kids need time when it's them deciding what to do. They also need time with family members and other engaged adults in their lives, because that's how they know that they're loved and protected and valued. And they need time where it's more structured and they're learning how to coexist as a team. Play provides the full panoply of benefits that are critical to childhood development. Everyone understands that when you see kids running and jumping and skipping and hopping, that there's a physical benefit, but it's also critical from a social and emotional perspective. It's how kids make friends. It's how they build strong bonds with adults in their lives. And it's also critical from a cognitive and creative development perspective. Think about when you were a kid and you made up, or kids in your lives today, and you make up all these complex worlds to visit and do things, or create forts in your basement. It's creativity these skills are so essential for success in the 21st century. And I think if you create a passion for play in kids and you nurture it, then they're going to be the ones who are going to seek out the opportunities to play sports, as opposed to feeling like kids are burning out at the age of 8 because there's too much pressure on them to play.
So I think when we were working with KaBOOM, we tried to tell people why we were doing it, and one of the kind of the philosophies came out, which is, and you guys helped us craft this, which was to build a playground within walking distance of every child in America, and that was years ago when you came up with that. But since that time, it's also kind of, it was referred to today with the First Lady, how far a park is, the safety of parks. How do you worry, what do you guys think about when you build a community-based playground and you think about safety?
Well, what we know when we engage the community, and the way we build playgrounds, as Kevin knows, is we get 200 volunteers together who've never built a playground before, and we build it in 6 hours. So it's a modern-day urban barn raising for kids. And the power of the community coming together means that they're owning the space, and they're going to want to make sure that it's successful and sustainable over the long haul. So it has to start with engaging the community in doing something for the kids in that community. But in the communities that we work in, which are very under-resourced, which have tough issues with violence and other crime, there's safety in numbers, and you need people out and about. And we know for the playgrounds that we build and playgrounds across the country, those are great oases. A place where kids are supposed to be protected and where they feel nurtured and valued and loved. But then what about all the space in between? How do we integrate play throughout the urban environment so that it's not just here's where kids belong and everything else is not conducive to them, but how do we create a different vision that we need to design cities with kids and families in mind, period, across the board. And so that's one of the things that we're really looking at now. How do you integrate play into the daily environment where kids and families are already spending time? What we know is that low-income kids spend almost 25% more time than their more affluent peers running errands and doing chores with the adults in their lives because there's no viable alternative for childcare. So yes, every city needs great playgrounds, great community hubs where play is valued. And in addition to that, we need playful sidewalks. and playful
You guys do
bus
something
stops.
bus stops, right?
Bus stops
Yeah.
and vacant lots. We just did a pilot program in the Bay Area with the NFL Foundation and the 50 Fund, the host committee for the Super Bowl, a few months ago. And we asked for great ideas for integrating play into the daily environment. And what we got back was fantastic. I'll just tell you about one of them, which was a vacant lot in a blighted neighborhood converted into a giant sandbox. 1,200 people showed up the first day. Little things like that show communities that we value families and we value kids, and play happens naturally as a result. And now we're trying to take that nationally, and we've got great collaborators with Target and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and HUD and National Endowment for the Arts to help us figure out how to create these great ideas for integrating play into the daily environment. So we change the value system. We change how people perceive what public space is about, and kids are put first.
So I don't really understand this term, so I'm going to need someone to help me. And so questions from the audience, please. This is your time to start raising your hand. Maybe you can help us. We have a complex called the ESPN Wide World of Sports in Orlando. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's an amazing facility. But you know, the Walt Disney Company pretty much preens that puppy, and it's beautiful. It's stunning, and we just had the Invictus Games there, and it's breathtaking, right? Most cities don't have those types of opportunities, but I'm seeing this word megacilities. What does that mean, and how does it affect what we do here as it relates to making sure that there's equity, there's enough resourcing to go around? Not only that is that when you go to those, there's the upkeep to it, right? So it's probably high registration fees or something like that. Do you guys have any comments? I'm not familiar with megas. Dev?
Yeah, Kevin, thank you. A lot of the mega facilities that have been developed in the last 10 years have been done by us, and we're very involved in them and manage many of them. And they're only equitable if you guarantee a certain inventory of time and use to underserved communities. And that can only occur if you address the transportation issue where most of these are located. Mm-hmm. So they're done for sports tourism. They're driven by economic development. So the people in the room for a venue like that to be funded by the hotel bed tax to get a facility done that would not otherwise be funded, right? All of that can be a good thing. If in the forecasting and the planning, you're guaranteeing access and a guaranteed inventory during the week to citizens who are the taxpayers in that community, and you're addressing issues of transportation. So at Rocky Top Sports World or the Myrtle Beach Sports Center or Round Rock, Texas, that's a facility, the Spooky Nook Complex in Lancaster, they're all mega complexes. They all have programs where there are internships out of the school, so there's mentoring for younger kids. They all have faith-based partners. They all have partnerships in the YMCA, but that has to be built into the DNA of the facility, where the reality of ESPN and Disney, it was not. That is truly about tourism. Mm-hmm. But most of the mega complexes that are coming online today that are well done and well managed have controlled that inventory. It's part of their forecast. It has to be part of the budgeting and finance process, though, in the beginning.
So are they municipal, or are they nonprofit, or how
yeah,
are
every
they
facility that
governance?
I just mentioned is municipally backed. Uh-huh. They are paid for out of the hotel bed tax. So sports travel, and this is the most exclusive segment of the travel industry, so nobody here is advocating that it is the very best for our kids either. It's feeding off of the hyper-competitive nature. It's feeding off of specialization. So there are real problems with it as well. I'm not denying those. But economic development funds them because sports travel is the only segment in the travel industry to never decline in a single quarter throughout the recession. So if you want to get something done, it's not a bad thing to hook your wagon to the Convention and Visitors Bureau who wants to develop a facility like this, but you need to have a voice in that process that is dedicated to improving access to all. And it has to happen early. So the people to involve are Parks and Recs, Economic Development, the city manager, maybe City Council and the mayor, but the city manager for sure, Parks and Recs, Economic Development, the city manager. If they're talking about a venue like this in your community, you should interject and start talking about access early.
So also in our Think Small report out, there's two areas here that caught my attention that were about resource funding coming from the federal government, basically, and the Land and Water Conservation Assistance Program, which has had $110 million. Then you look at the Fixing America's Surface and Transportation FAST Act, which has $800 million. Are you guys applying to any of these types of grants, Corliss? Anything that you're going in to do?
Ours is mostly related to Centers for Disease Control because we have a health component. So we're looking at health outcomes.
Okay.
So mostly we use the health federal agencies. But I mean, those are great entities to look at in the future.
Anybody else block grants or programming?
Well, the national competition that we just launched to integrate Play Everywhere, the reason we're partnering with HUD is because that's scale. So the Community Development Block Grant Program puts out $3 billion a year to local communities. It's primarily dedicated to low-income communities, and we're not arguing for more funding, we're arguing for better use of the funding that exists. And so the goal with having HUD at the table is to say, okay, all these great ideas that come out, whether it's putting a sandbox in a vacant lot or redoing a bus stop with some playful elements, those are things that municipalities all across the country should be using their CDBG money to fund.
Right.
Which will hit the population that we want, but it also then creates this dynamic where public space becomes kid and family friendly, which is the ultimate goal.
All right, so we got a little bit of time for questions, and I told you guys to jump in if you needed to, but if there are any questions, please raise your hand. I just wanted you to know that ESPN has been experimenting with investments with LISC. We did some things in Chicago. We've also been working with the National Parks and Recreation to update and to look at small spaces and to other types of pieces, but not just for the building. The capital stuff, unfortunately, is very, very expensive, but it's the programming thing. So sustainable programming, obviously important to all of you, right? Is how do you keep your programming going? Do any questions about programming or how you keep your as a fix? Maybe the panel can offer something for anybody in the audience about things they've struggled with on funding. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, Ted Creighton. Joy of the People in St. Paul. We won a U.S. Soccer grant, U.S. Soccer Foundation grant from the Soccer Foundation, so I wanted to thank Ed on that. But on another project, we got, I wanted to talk a little bit about, actually the meeting is tomorrow. We have like an important community meeting in St. Paul at our rec center. And the meeting is about turfing our tennis courts. So we have 2 tennis courts, not very highly used, on a recreation facility that we partner with the city of St. Paul to take over. And the community is sort of up in arms that it's going to be changed to a multi-use or perhaps a soccer facility. And so I guess your feedback on sort of the changing nature of sports. We also have 3 baseball fields that nobody ever uses. And how to convince the community that this is really important for them and that long term.
I have a question for you on that line. So when you say nobody ever uses them, are there programs that are offered that nobody apply for or register for, or are there?
Tennis is essentially the perfect free play sport, right? People show up and play. But it's not much of a community builder. It's people driving in from out. It's used more by people walking their dogs than it is playing tennis. It's sort of an urban tennis facility that the local community is very protective of.
Are you? I'm just going to go here because this is the questions I would ask you. So you're saying that nobody's playing there, but my question was, are there programs that are sustainable to teach kids tennis? Is USTA Junior there? Is Lacrosse? Are there things to help program that versus just wanting the site?
Well, so sorry, this is complicated, but
sure.
So we run a free play soccer program there. And we use the tennis courts as sort of futsal courts, and we use the grass we have inflatable courts. One kid designed a round inflatable court with 3 goals. So you go there, try to figure out how to play on it.
Cool.
So our idea is to turf the tennis courts just to create more opportunities for kids because there's such a high demand. And there's a very low demand for tennis. So as we transfer from soccer to tennis or more multi-sport to tennis, we need to convince the community that this is the right thing to do.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Any USTA people are here? How about lacrosse? Anybody?
Well, I also.
But you need some answers, right? So we'll see if we can help you get to some conversations around that.
Our family is also a tennis family. So we've got soccer, lacrosse, tennis all happening in the same family. Well, one, you don't mess with tennis people. That's what I've learned because they've been threatening to kind of raise a large indoor facility that does have heavy use actually in our area. But tennis players like to know their courts are there. So I guess an assessment, yes, of who's using it is one. Two, to Kevin's point, making sure that there isn't an unmet need in terms of programming, like would tennis be a nice complement to the soccer side that's happening, or is it truly that there is definitely more demand and that more kids would be served to play soccer, and maybe partnering with another facility that has better tennis is better equipped to do tennis. And then obviously lacrosse, we're looking at ways that it can be played on a cement surface as well as a grass surface. It certainly makes some elements of the game different, but like for example, our wheelchair lacrosse players play on a cement surface because it's much easier to wheel, obviously. So there's versions of the game that can go on there. I love your idea of the futsal on the hard court is also a great possibility too, but it's kind of rethinking your sport in terms of how could we play on the surface that's available, or is the turf necessary, but kind of doing that analysis of like why is this going unused? But you also want to make sure you don't alienate your community of tennis players or other sports as well at the same time. So I don't envy your situation. I'm not offering you any solutions at all, but right, yeah, I mean.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you said that because tennis, as I understand it from some of the data, is still one of the sports that actually has got incremental growth. There's some have plateaued, some continue to grow now that there's been an effort like Project Play, but Minneapolis and that area being very well known for being out. When it's sunny there, everyone's outdoors, right? And not.
So we did have a good meeting with a group called Urban Tennis, who does program that court, but it's not very well attended.
Got it.
And we said, well, how about converting so now you have a turf tennis court, and this creates a differentiated surface. You have the best tennis courts in the city now. And they said, well, we're really not interested in playing on that. But they did give us their approval and help us move along. So
Well, I was talking to a very amazing company last night about community meetings and buildings, and I promised I wouldn't say anything, but that's a struggle for everybody, right? Is that it's this collaborative partnership as owning the right to be able to do business, right? So you much like corporate America has to create a license to operate for corporate responsibility, so do nonprofits, right? So you have to be able to establish not just your mission base, but you have to say that there are populations within your community that may not want to be prioritizing your particular mission at that point in time. I'm a classic example of respect that I played tennis, but if someone was to take my tennis court away, because I don't get this body by, playing tennis, but I would be bummed. I'm like, wait a minute, because I'm probably going to play tennis at some point in time, right? But to your point, it's like, how do you get me to that meeting to say, okay, you're going to be okay, Kevin, and here's some other stuff that we could do to engage you. Very, very interesting. This is that whole piece about how there are different needs and prioritizations, and sports need to work together, and activities need to work together for inclusion and to make sure that there are met needs. Not everybody wins, right? But how do you win to the most opportunistic way as possible? How are we doing on time? We're okay? I got 3 or 4 minutes. We need another great question.
I just want to piggyback on that last point. This shouldn't be a zero-sum game,
right?
And I think that in the nonprofit world is always this sense of scarcity, and I get and you don't get, and those kinds of things. And I think there's enough space and enough opportunity for pretty much everybody to do what they need to be done, and the demand is big enough and broad enough that there's real opportunities for tennis and basketball and football and lacrosse and pretty much any sport in the communities that we're particularly underserved communities, where there's literally not a lot of anything going on. And so I don't think it should turn into a conversation whether the tennis court stays or whether there's a soccer court. It should be about how do we create increase the access to playable spaces in those communities, broaden the footprint as opposed to, oh, let's take it from him and give it to her.
Right, and I guess to the point of this whole report, right, which is that we've got to be able to use these indicators, right? So specialization and coaching and small spaces and safety. We've got as stakeholders in this space, believe that those are critical functions. They're going to hold up the pillars for, First Tee and for KaBOOM and for Lacrosse and for thought leaders who are trying to build things on integrated strategies for where do you put these play spaces. But this is the hard thing even though this has been going on for a while, there's got to be some common themes and common beliefs that you're going to work together to accomplish what I think are really strong support structures for project play, but then overlaying them with the ability for social inclusion, et cetera. So was there a question right here? Yes.
Sure. So it's for Corliss and Chip. So talking about kind of systemizing creativity and thinking small. So for Corliss, have you guys been able to share your learnings of, in this southern community, there's a lot of churches available, and this is how we're able to, show what we've done here. Maybe this could happen somewhere in South Carolina or somewhere in Georgia. And then for Chip, thinking about sports that you need certain equipment in a certain area, like golf. Well, maybe if there's snow sports, could you share how you've been able to introduce snow sports without being on a mountain? So then when the kids get to the mountain, they're like, this is it, this is the connection. So kind of two separate questions, but just being able to share what you guys have found works.
For us, we did a toolkit. So everything that we did, we made sure that when we did an open use policy presentation, we have that in English and Spanish. All our forms, templates of what an open use policy looks like, our forms of what are walkable communities, what's a mile, how to do a mile from the church to house A. All these things we kind of integrated into formats, into files. So when I'm talking to someone or someone's like, oh my God, your stuff is great. And they don't say it like that, but when they're saying something to that nature, I'm able to say, okay, here's our files. This is what we're doing. Do it in your community. We don't want it to just stay really good in Charlotte. We wanted to kind of, get going so other communities could kind of have sort of the little success that we've been having and see what it looks like in other communities. Because we may find out that it's only great in southern communities. It may not be great up north. So we really want to know what that looks like. We don't have to reach for it. So if anyone wants a toolkit, hit me up afterwards.
All right.
I'm pretty happy to share it.
A deliverable. Great.
Yeah.
Chip?
From our perspective, so the First Tee created our national school program in 2004 in partnership with Snag, which is an equipment company that produces age-appropriate golf equipment that's modified to be able to use indoors. That program was rolled out in 2004 and now works with over 7,000 elementary schools across the U.S. The program was designed as a way to bring golf to the community because, again, you can build a facility, but kids may not necessarily end up there. So the First Tee, kind of with that thought in mind, created this package program that they could take to schools and community centers to be able to introduce these core values and healthy habits and life skills through the game of golf in the schools, in recreation centers. So I would kind of challenge everybody in the room to figure out, how do I do that? How do I package my product? Because if you look at it from the school's perspective, or the family's perspective, they may not have the transportation to get to your facility, to a field, whether it's lacrosse or soccer or football or whatever it is. But to think, how do I mini-size my program? How do I take a golf course and shrink it into a bag that I can take into a school and introduce these concepts, and then hopefully figure out ways to partner with these schools or with these community agencies to get the families engaged and to get them out to your facility, to get them more in-depth exposure to the sports that you're advocating on behalf of. So it's really worked well for the First Tee. Our program is going to reach 10 million kids by 2017 because they've created these outreach opportunities. And it's just finding equipment partners to work with, vendors, where you can modify your games and adapt and right-size them to be able to implement them anywhere and then get the kids to transfer over to bigger spaces to hopefully keep them involved with the sport for a lifetime.
Great. So continuing conversation is in 808, which is just out over here, I am told. And so we want to thank, please give everybody a round of applause for the great thinking that they have and the great work that they do. Appreciate it.